Out of all of the genres of video game that exist, there is one that I feel like hasn't gotten nearly enough attention, and that is combo-based melee FPS games. Over the past few months, I've been slowly converting my movement shooter into a movement slasher. And in today's episode, we'll be diving into how I turned my small, flaccid combat from a year ago to this huge, very hard, throbbing combat you see now. First, let me re-explain what Rift is since it went through some pretty major changes after the last update. Rift Genesis is a first-person movement slasher set in a universe where Earth is dying and humanity is on the brink of extinction. Suddenly, a mysterious rift appears in a massive explosion, opening pathways to different dimensions. You play as a rebel nomad who explores a variety of alternate realities, all while avoiding the increasing bounty on his head. Rift Genesis is the game in this video. The game in this video also happens to be on Steam. The game in this video that is on Steam also happens to be wishlistable. You know what to do. Alright, cool, so now that's out of the way, let's get back to violence. The combat in my game has always been, how do I say this? A stupid, terrible, utterly lobotomizing experience, so awful that it rivals the sensation of sitting in an electric chair made of chainsaws. I'm going to have carpal tunnel when I'm 60 because of how much the combat suffered from shoot everything till it dies syndrome. It was almost as bad as Destiny. The guns were all the same, the enemies were uninteresting, and in an effort to make everything look coherent, it was all consistently ugly. Not to mention all the levels played exactly the same. No matter the layout, at the end of the day, you would just still shoot the robot till it violently combusted. After the horrors I committed by making this sorry excuse for a combat system dawned on me, I knew I would have to make some fairly big changes, but what would make the combat more fun and interesting? What would make the environments of the level matter more? What starts with a C and ends with Ombo? If you were thinking better combat, then you're right. If you were thinking anything else, you're stupid. Anyway, here's how I improve the combat through combos. Most of the FPS combo games I can think of have a very heavy focus on weapon variety. Their combos come from being able to switch between an array of diverse weapons effectively and efficiently. But if I was going to make a combo system, it was going to have to be somewhat unique, you know, so it stands out. I didn't want to just have to rely on having tons of guns. I want to touch my adversaries. Melee combos are nothing new. They've been in games for a long time. Something I see a lot in games with combos are style meters. A style meter is usually a ranking that appears somewhere on the screen telling you how well you're playing the game, based on things like style, damage, etc. The idea of a style meter is great, however, it doesn't do anything. It's just kind of there for the player to either feel good or bad about how they're playing. There are some games that do a bit more with it, like tying it to currency, but still not enough in my opinion. Rift isn't like the other girls. We don't have a style meter, we have a style bar. But wait, there's more. I decided I want combos to be directly related to health, essentially making the player depend directly on their own skill to stay alive. This is where the patented combo bar comes in. Every time you do anything that would be in a combo, like launching an enemy in the air or landing a heavy hit, you gain a certain amount of points. Those points accumulate in that bar until it's full, and only then can you redeem those points for health. It's definitely a very simple system, but as soon as I added it, I noticed the pacing of the game changed drastically. I found myself rushing towards enemies instead of away from them when I was getting close to dying. Taking damage was simply the game telling me to lock in, and when I did die, it was mostly my fault. When I decided to pivot towards combos, I narrowed it down to 4 pillars I had to address: physics, environment, weapons, and equipment. Now, there are like 3 good first-person melee combat games, and the rest are C-tier at best. But the good ones all have physics in common. Hitting or killing enemies affects the physics of that enemy, which can result in some pretty funny stuff.
Farewell. May you rest in peace.
So naturally, your boy had to throw in some enemy physics, you feel me? I'll just edit the navigation system to allow me to use rigid bodies and... That would have been great, right? You know, sometimes it's my fault that making this game take so long. Like the one time I gatekeeped my own code from myself with an "if you know, you know" comment. But other times, it's just Unity. It's just Unity. As it turns out, the default AI navigation system in Unity is poopy fart and doesn't like gravity. So we're going to be using A-star pathfinding instead, which loves gravity and allows me to have enemies that can still be affected by physics. It's great, and you can get it for the low price of $140. 140. But I'm loaded, so that wasn't a problem, and I bought it before I could really think too hard. There are 3 main ways the enemy physics can be manipulated: the player, the environment, and the other enemies. As the player, you affect them mainly through your sword and your utilities. The environment can take several different forms. Whether it's a geyser or a fight taking place underwater, I want the environment to interact with and heavily affect combat encounters. Something I'm surprised I don't see nearly enough are combos that, instead of relying purely on player arsenal, rely more on the environment. A good example is this clip of Dark Messiah.
You won't make it. Show some skill before. What was that?
And now here's a clip of environmental combat from Rift.
Okay, alright, so okay, okay, bounce, okay, hit him up, kick him in the thing, okay, is he gonna...
Like, come on, that was sick. So anyway, to scratch that itch, I added a couple of things. For example, there's this big rock with a mushroom attached to it. When you shoot the mushroom, it retracts and the rock comes falling down and crushing whatever's beneath it. This leads to combos that get the player to try and move enemies beneath it to get an insta-kill. Outside of actual environmental hazards, simple things like walls, floors, and ceilings can become deadly weapons. Hitting enemies against them with enough force can do lots of damage. Similarly, any sort of change in elevation can be used as well. What's great about this is that every level has these, meaning that even if I don't add fancy hazards, the environment can still play a very strong role in the combat. I tested this out by just fighting various enemies in a solitary confinement chamber. While not as engaging as a solitary confinement chamber with a giant robot crushing boulder, it was still fun, so I can finally check that off the list. Moving on, we have... What makes or breaks any melee combat game are the weapons, so getting this next part right is essential. I modeled a sword that can fold into itself and extend, sort of like a lightsaber. This just made a lot more sense logically because wall running and sliding around would be a lot harder if you had a scabbard weighing you down. In-game, it has 3 main moves. First, we have the slice. Slicing by default doesn't do much besides doing damage, but if you pair the slice with a dash, it becomes a spike, which can push stun enemies around. Second, the throw. Throwing the sword at a stunned or airborne enemy will juggle them. And there isn't a limit to how much you can do this, so if you really wanted to, you could just continuously cyberbully them until they die. Lastly, the parry. It works on melee attacks and heavy projectiles. An example of this would be parrying a rocket. When a parry projectile hits its original sender, it stuns them too, allowing you to follow that up with more combos, or what I like to call a grapple slap, where you grapple onto the unsuspecting enemy and confiscate their skull. You can also kick enemies around by simply dashing into them. This was initially a bug. This was always a feature, and I had this idea from the start. Lastly, in the weapons department, we have sidearms. Sidearms are mostly guns right now, and are the only other constant weapon other than your sword. You got your shotguns, your SMGs, your sexy revolvers, your war crimes, and of course the default pistol. I plan on adding more sidearms in the future and having them be more creative, like a crossbow or a pocket rocket, but that will come later on. I'm also teetering on the edge of adding alt fires, but my crippling indecision hasn't allowed me to make a choice. Another large component of the guns are the mods. Mods will add new properties to your sidearm. For example, making the bullets ricochet or making them juggle enemies. I have lots of ideas for weapon mods, but I wanted to get the base combat feeling as good as possible before expanding into that area. The last piece of the combo puzzle is equipment. It's hard to explain equipment because they could literally be anything. A grenade, a portable fan, a mushroom. The idea behind them is more or less like it's an ability that you can throw. They're way more useful in combos than alone for damage. For example, a lot of people's favorite equipment so far has been the porta-fan, which is the fan I mentioned earlier. You can throw it against the surface and will create a strong gust of wind you can use to propel yourself, kind of like a jump pad. The simple functionality of this is that if an object is above the fan will blow it upwards. It's extremely simple, yet it has the potential to be used in all sorts of very creative ways. You can hit an enemy up into the air and then throw a fan underneath them and send them flying, allowing you to do all sorts of things to them. Okay, so now we have all the different parts of a Rift combo implemented. Now, whether or not any of this is actually good is pretty subjective. I mean, I made it, right? So I want to say it's pretty good, you know, but that's just me. The only other logical way to learn whether or not this new combat is fun is abducting random bystanders and force feeding them my game while holding them hostage until they tell me I cooked. So here's how that went.
Mike looking.
Okay. No. Don't look behind you. Why are you looking behind you? You came from over there.
Where's Mike going?
Where's your weapon, dog?
Where's Mike going? I understand it now. I understand it now, bruh. Oh, Lord, the game won't let me go, bro.
They loved it. So let's recap. The combos in Rift have 4 main components: physics interactions, environments affecting combos and combat opportunities, weapons feeling good and giving a variety of ways to be used, and equipment complementing both the weapons and the environment to tie it all in together. And that, ladies and gentle chads, is a step-by-step guide on how to make peak first-person melee slasher combat. I'm still looking to expand on the combat and make it more stylish, etc. So if any of you guys have any ideas, just send them over in the Discord linked below or leave a comment. Oh, and before I forget, again, make sure to wishlist the game. It helps me immensely, like I'm not even kidding. And yep, pretty much it. See ya.